Rome's greatest soldiers were coming home from war, but no one was waiting to celebrate them. These men had bled for the Republic, and they came back to find everything they owned had been stolen. They walked to their farms and found strangers living there. Or worse, no farms at all. The Senate watched them beg and felt nothing. While soldiers bled, the wealthy had used the land that belonged to everyone for their own private empires. An eviction notice for a man who had survived 20 years of battle. Rome's gratitude delivered in ink and contempt. Families were torn from their homes so that senators could grow rich on stolen soil. Rome had broken the men who made Rome great. The city swallowed them whole into the slums where glory meant nothing and hunger meant everything. Inside the Senate, men laughed, signed land deeds, and drank wine on the bones of veterans. Every cart loaded with confiscated grain was a dagger in the back of a soldier. He sold his battle medal for bread. The merchant offered him less than the bronze was worth. Standing on that hill, 5 broken men looked down at Rome and decided it was time to fight back. The land was parched. The olive trees were dying. And so was the Republic. They came home from Hispania on damaged ships, hollow-eyed, and Rome offered them silence. She dug in the dark because daylight meant the estate soldiers would come. His name was Tiberius Gracchus, and he had seen enough. The Senate was tearing itself apart over the wealth it had stolen. Tiberius Gracchus raised his voice, and Rome went quiet to listen. The people of Rome had finally found their champion. He was a patrician who chose the people, and the people loved him for it. From the rostra, his voice carried across 10,000 upturned faces. In the shadows of the Senate, old men made plans that had nothing to do with law. He pressed the seal into the wax, and the powerful held their breath. Rome was 2 cities, one of marble, one of mud, and only one of them had enough to eat. They reached for him like he was water in a desert. Scipio Nasica stood, and every syllable was a threat. He read it once, he read it twice, then he folded it and walked back into the forum. The Capitoline was beautiful and merciless, like everything Rome ever built. The plan was whispered over a fountain, under a starless sky. They counted the tablets, and they counted what they had lost. Every displaced farmer who told his story was one more indictment of the empire. Octavius stood and vetoed the future. The look on Tiberius's face in that moment has no adequate description. He called the assembly and made the argument that had never been made before in Rome. They dragged Octavius out while he screamed that the Republic was dying, and he was right. 3 commissioners, 3 styluses, and the biggest redistribution in Roman history began. For one brief season, Roman farmers plowed their own land and wept with gratitude. But in the dark, the letters were flying. They plastered the accusation in the rain, and by morning, everyone had read it. He stood on an upturned cart and tried to save himself with words while armed men gathered. Around the fire, the philosophy sounded like revolution, because it was. Rome's poor had watched their city's glory built on their suffering for long enough. The violence of the system was always there. The Gracchi just made Rome look at it. That night, Tiberius could not sleep. History rarely lets its heroes rest. The morning of the assembly, the sky was the wrong color. The Senate had decided that law was for the powerless. When senators lift clubs, the Republic is already dead. In that one frozen second, Tiberius understood exactly what was about to happen. The Capitoline became a slaughterhouse. He was struck by a man he had governed alongside for years. Tiberius Gracchus fell, and with him fell the pretense that Rome was governed by law. 300 dead on the hill where Romans went to vote. They were hauled away like garbage under cover of dark. The Tiber accepted him without ceremony. The morning after, Rome looked the same. It would never be the same. Her grief was the only honest testimony given that day. The senators called it justice. History calls it something else. Gaius was 16 when his brother was murdered. He never forgot. The repression spread. It always does when murder goes unpunished. Justice was not available to those who had lost the most. They erased the records in stone, but memory cannot be chiseled away. The legions came home and found the Republic had killed their champion. In Sardinia, Gaius read the reports and made his decision. He walked through the forum at night and did not stop at the spot where his brother died. He kept walking. He spoke at his own trial as if he had already won. When Gaius Gracchus rose to speak, Rome held its breath. He had built a coalition from the forgotten people of Rome. When Gaius pointed, the audience did not look away. Rome was a city of contradictions, and Gaius Gracchus intended to resolve them by force of law. For the first time in years, Roman families ate. Every stone on those roads was a vote against the system that had abandoned the poor, a law in wax, a revolution in writing. Gaius shifted the courts, and the Senate felt the ground move under them. On the ruins of Carthage, he planted the seeds of a new Rome. In the Senate, old men whispered that this could not be allowed to continue. His voice cut through Roman marble like iron through oak. The Senate's answer to reform was to outbid it with lies. He saw it happening in real time, his coalition being bought away. The grain ships of Ostia were the lifeblood of Rome, and Gaius had hold of the pulse. They wrote martial law onto a scroll and called it necessity. One by one, his allies weighed the cost and departed. The counting was done, and the numbers did not lie. On the Aventine, 3,000 people chose to stand with a man who had chosen to stand for them. The ultimatum arrived, as ultimatums always do, with a clean face and bloody intentions. His son held onto his toga, and Gaius looked at him the way a man looks at a closed door. The Republic was marching against its own citizens. The streets of the Aventine ran red, and history noted the names of no senators who died that day. He ran, and the city watched and did not help. The Grove of the Furies received him as the city had refused to. They died together, master and slave, which was the most Roman thing anyone did that day. They put his head on a pike and called it order. 3,000, not killed in battle, killed by their own government. The execution of Fulvius Flaccus and his sons was the Senate's final answer to reform. Rage does not die, it waits. The slaves of Sicily had been watching Rome destroy its own citizens. They took notes. The senator read the report and felt what he had spent his life refusing to feel: fear. When Rome's allies rose in the social war, they were fighting for what the Gracchi had promised. The veterans organized because no one else was going to. Marius made the promise because Rome's broken promise had made it necessary. A soldier's thumbprint in wax, the most honest contract in Roman history at that moment. The Senate debated whether law still applied to generals. It did not. When Sulla crossed the city boundary with his army, the Republic made a sound like a foundation cracking. A name on a list, an execution without trial. The Senate's solution to disagreement: systematized. They came for people in their homes, and Rome's streets became a lesson in what happens when institutions fail. Julius Caesar was 20 years old and learning everything. The Forum, once the heart of the Republic, was now a battlefield between armies of citizens. On a column, someone carved the truth. It outlasted everything built to suppress it. The senators drove 23 daggers into Caesar and thought they had saved the Republic. They had ended it. The column falls in slow motion, and we count the cracks: land, courts, assembly, tradition, law. Cicero's hands nailed to the rostra, the mouth of Rome silenced by the Senate's silence, the Republic's last gasp. In the empty Senate chamber, Octavian understood that what had started in a field in Etruria had ended here. The empire began with cheering. The Republic had ended with weeping. The tenant farmed the land that was never his, and nothing had changed except the name at the top. Rome had built the most magnificent prison in human history and called it civilization. His grave has no name. History does not remember who he was, only what he built and bled for. 2,000 years later, you can walk where they walked. The stone remembers. 3 moments of murder, 1 river of blood. The Gracchi had seen the whole chain and tried to break it. This fragment of bronze is the Lex Agraria, the law that started everything, and it survived. Children learned the story that was safe to tell. The real story lived underground. Caesar was doing what the Gracchi had died trying to do, but with an army instead of a vote. The marble portrait smiles, and the slums endure behind it. That is the honest portrait of Rome. The slaves had watched the land disputes for decades. When they moved like an avalanche. 2,000 years apart, the posture is the same. The problem is the same. Wild beasts have their dens. The men who fight for Rome have only the air. He said it. They killed him for it. The poor chose the army because the Republic had left them no other choice. And in doing so, they ended the Republic. The paper trail ended here. The land was never truly redistributed. The office closed, and the crime continued. He pressed his hands into the soil of his briefly owned farm and wept, and the land received his grief without comment. A city burning in 3 places at once is a city that has run out of answers. The land is still there. The argument never really ended. The tourists take photographs on the hill where Tiberius died, and the stones do not explain. A child's flower on a dead man's name, the smallest and most complete act of remembrance. The Tiber has carried away 10,000 forgotten dead, and still it runs to the sea. He stood at the edge and looked at the land, and we are still asking his question. The seal is broken, the eagle is cracked, but the wax remembers the shape of what it held. Rome's greatest heroes were not the generals who conquered the world. They were the men who tried to give it back. What would you have done? Would you have stood on the Capitoline, knowing the clubs were coming? The question lives in the stone.